Get out of that seat before I call security. First class isn't for standby passengers. The words cut through the hum of the idle engines like a blade. Captain Erica Vaughn didn't whisper. She projected, loud, authoritative, certain. Julian Hayes didn't flinch. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't explain. He sat in silence in first class in his charcoal seat, wearing dark jeans and a simple crewneck shirt. To Erica, that meant unworthy. To the smirking white man, 2 rows back, it meant fraud. To the rest of the cabin, it was awkward. What no one realized was this Julian Hayes didn't just book this flight. He owned it. He owned the aircraft, the terminal, the operating company, and in 30 minutes, he'd own the fate of everyone who thought power wore labels. They wanted him off the plane. He was about to ground them all. Captain Erica Vaughn remained in the aisle arms, folded across her chest, her posture radiating command. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't pull Julian aside. She made a scene deliberately. Across the cabin, passengers watched with a discomfort they wouldn't name. A white man in a navy sport coat chuckled into his whiskey, shaking his head. A woman in pearls glanced away, choosing her silence over engagement, and the rest simply watched. Julian remained still. No protest, no panic, just poise. He slowly adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, his thumb brushing the face of a sleek smartwatch on his wrist. No one noticed. Yet. I said, "This is not your seat," Erica repeated louder. "You'll need to move or I'll have you removed." Her words were sharp, not because she needed to be loud, but because she wanted everyone to hear. Julian glanced at the overhead light panel, then at the crew nameplate above the door, Captain Erica Vaughn, Flight Authority. His eyes returned to her, calm, inquisitive, disbelieving. Still, he said nothing. The silence began to crack the atmosphere. That's when Howard Gaines leaned in from the opposite aisle. Dressed in a designer coat and polished shoes, he exuded arrogance as casually as he wore cologne. "Don't block the aisle," Howard muttered, brushing Julian's carry-on bag aside with his foot. "Some of us actually paid to be here." Julian's gaze moved slowly to Howard. 1 beat, 2. Then back to Erica. She interpreted his stillness as defiance. "I don't know if you misunderstood the booking process," she said, "but standby tickets don't belong in first class." Still no answer. No confrontation. Just posture. Just presence. That's when Erica crossed a line. Unless you're someone's assistant or a tech contractor who wandered into the wrong cabin, you're going to need to head back. A few passengers looked up sharply, but no one spoke, because her assumption matched what many of them had already concluded silently. He didn't look like he belonged. Julian didn't smirk, didn't flinch. He only leaned slightly, reaching into his jacket and removing a generic boarding slip. Black and white. No gold seal, no first-class emblem. He handed it to Erica. She barely glanced at it. Didn't scan. Didn't confirm. Just waved it away. "Not premium," she said loud enough for the entire front cabin to hear. "Please exit before we call security." From 3 rows back, a phone rose slightly. Corey Blake, a digital media consultant, hovered his thumb near the record button. "This should be filmed," he whispered. Next to him, Tara Monroe gently touched his arm. "Talk?" "Don't post," she said. "If there's a line to hold, we hold it with our voices." Corey hesitated, but left the phone up. Devin Walsh, seated 1 row across, leaned toward Julian. "This feels wrong," he murmured. Julian turned his head just slightly. "Then don't watch it happen," he replied. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it had weight. Erica turned to the cabin. "We're attempting to verify passenger credentials. Thank you for your patience." Then Julian pressed something subtle on his smartwatch. A haptic response blinked once. He lifted his phone. "Simone," he said. The voice on the other end was calm, feminine, controlled. "Standing by, sir. Begin Protocol 7, Julian said. "I want everything logged. Verbally." "Already in progress," Simone replied. Erica squinted. "Who's Simone?" she asked suddenly, unsure. Julian didn't answer, but behind him, Howard couldn't help himself. "This is what happens when we let anyone in." He scoffed. "It cheapens the entire experience." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a metal badge, flashed it like a mock VIP medallion. "Some people still need reminders." Tara's eyes narrowed. "No one's impressed," she said. Howard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, I'm not here to impress." He dropped a folded paper near Julian's foot. Julian picked it up. 3 words were written in thick ink. "Try coach fraud." He looked at it, turned it over, then raised it in the air. "This speak for anyone else here?" he asked. A hush. Then Devon stood. "Not for me." Corey added, "That's disgusting." Erica's face twisted. "You have 60 seconds to exit this aircraft." Julian didn't move. He placed the phone back to his ear. "Simone," he said. "Still here." "Call it in." "Confirmed," Simone replied. "Escalation authorized. Logged under verbal authority." At that exact moment, the cabin shifted. The tone, the pressure, the air. No one knew exactly what Protocol 7 was, but they were about to find out. The hum in the cabin shifted into something unnameable. It wasn't turbulence, not from the sky, but from the ground beneath assumptions. Captain Erica Vaughn stepped back, slightly unnerved by Julian's calm. Her hand moved to her belt where her crew intercom rested. She clicked it. "Flight deck, this is Vaughn. We may have a passenger refusal escalation underway. Prepare to contact terminal security." The intercom buzzed once, then silence. Julian didn't glance at her. Instead, he pressed his fingers together in a way that almost looked like meditation. "Simona," he said softly into his phone. "Still with you, sir. Initiate temporary comm isolation. Lock crew deck audio loop for 10 minutes. Copy. Comm isolation activated. Deck response restricted to security override only." At that moment, Erica's belt buzzed again. She clicked. No tone. She clicked again. Nothing. She frowned, turned toward First Officer Paul Kendrick, seated at the forward cockpit hatch. "Paul," she barked. "Are you getting anything from control?" Paul looked down at his console, then up at her. "Audio's unresponsive," he said. "Switch channels." "I did." Erica's brows narrowed. "Try again." Julian sat back, folded one leg over the other. To the casual observer, he looked like a passenger who'd decided to wait this out. But for the few watching carefully, Devon, Tara, Corey, Nia, it was clear something had changed. Tara leaned toward Devon. "What is he doing?" Devon shook his head. "Whatever it is, he's not bluffing." Meanwhile, Howard Gaines sat with growing irritation. "This is absurd," he muttered. "Are we really letting this circus delay departure?" He turned to Erica. "Captain, either throw him off or move this along." Erica, already frustrated by the dead comms, turned back to Julian. "I've had enough games." Julian tilted his head. "No games," he said quietly. "Just mirrors." "Excuse me? You're looking at the reflection of your choices. I'm just holding it up for everyone else to see." Erica stiffened. "You don't get to hijack this flight with theatrics." Julian didn't rise, didn't raise his voice, but his next words landed like a gavel. "I didn't hijack anything he said. I built this." The statement hovered. Unbelievable. Unthinkable. Except he said it with such stillness, such gravity, that it couldn't be easily dismissed. Corey finally stepped fully into the aisle. "Captain," he said, voice steady, Maybe you want to check his name before this goes any further." "Stay out of this," Erica snapped. But Paul Kendrick looked uneasy. "I'll pull up the manifest," he said quietly. He opened the tablet affixed to the cockpit wall. Erica turned to him. "What are you doing?" "Due diligence," he said. Julian's voice interrupted. "No need." He turned to Simone. "Protocol 7, Level 2 identification override. Clear display. Forward crew manifest only. Confirmed. Transmitting crew-linked ID overlay now." A second later, Paul's tablet blinked. Then refreshed. And their second name from the top, Julian Hayes, Executive Tier. Owner, CWV Holdings, verified. Paul stared at it. His mouth moved slightly, but no sound came out. Tara, watching from her seat, whispered, "It's real." Devon leaned back. "He's not just someone. He's the someone." Erica reached for the tablet. Paul didn't hand it over. She stepped closer. "Let me see that." Paul didn't move. "Captain," he said, "you need to take a breath." "Excuse me?" "You've made this personal," Paul said, the tremble gone from his voice. "And you didn't even check his name before calling for removal." Erica opened her mouth, but Julian raised his hand. A small gesture. "Simone," he said, "initiate cabin logging. Full voice transcription. Tag by speaker identity. Activated." Across the intercom, a new sound buzzed a chime signaling active legal audio capture. Corey whispered, "That's internal protocol software. That's not public." Howard stood. "You can't just wiretap us." Julian finally stood slow and deliberate. "You seem to think this is your plane," he said. Locking eyes with Howard. "Let me clarify, it's not." He turned to Erica. "You seem to think this is your chain of command. It isn't." And then, to everyone else, every voice in this cabin is now part of an official record. The cabin sat in stunned silence. No cameras, no crew intervention, just the invisible weight of accountability settling like gravity. Tara slowly exhaled. "That's why he didn't yell." Devon nodded. He didn't have to. At the rear of the cabin, Nia finally spoke. "I've boarded 100 flights. This is the first time someone didn't have to explain their worth." Julian turned toward her, nodded once, then faced the front of the plane again. Simone. "Yes, sir. Prepare next sequence. Sequence 2 activated. Ready when you are." Erica stepped back, rattled. Paul sat quietly, staring at the name on the screen. Julian looked around the room one more time. His voice was soft, but absolute. "Let's reset this flight with truth." Captain Erica Vaughn stood frozen in the aisle. Her usual control, the kind built over 20 years of flying, was slipping. Julian Hayes didn't need to yell. He didn't need to wave credentials. All he had done was speak quietly, precisely, and the entire aircraft had turned its gaze from him to her. Paul Kendrick sat in silence, staring at the tablet in his lap. He didn't scroll. He didn't breathe. There, glowing on screen in official Crestwing formatting, was the name Julian Hayes, Executive Tier, Owner, Crestwing Ventures. He looked up. Captain Paul said, voice low but resolute, "We've made a mistake." Erica spun on him. "Don't start second-guessing now." Paul's eyes locked with hers. "No, I'm not second-guessing. I'm recognizing something I should have seen years ago." Erica's mouth tightened. He came in unverified, no gold boarding pass, no visible ID. Paul didn't blink. And that's exactly the point. Julian stood at the front of the cabin now, not imposing, not proud, just present. He folded his hands in front of him. "Mr. Kendrick, he said you've flown hundreds of these routes. Let me ask, how many passengers have you personally challenged for lack of external confirmation?" Paul hesitated. "A few. Usually, when instructed." Julian's eyes didn't shift. By whom? Paul swallowed. Mostly captains. Julian waited. Paul sighed. Mostly Erica. The cabin reacted subtly. Postures shifted. Nia raised an eyebrow. Devon leaned forward. Tara's jaw tightened. Julian continued. And what language did those instructions use? Paul didn't want to answer. But the silence demanded it. She called it brand alignment. Said certain passengers didn't fit the Crestwing image. If they wore streetwear sneakers, no business card or briefcase. Double-check ID. Julian nodded once. Were there other cues? Paul hesitated. She sometimes used the word neutral. Said we needed to preserve a neutral look in the cabin. Tara scoffed under her breath. Neutral, she said. Code for whitewashed, Erica snapped. I never said that. Not directly. Julian turned to her. You never had to. A silence followed, heavy, revealing. Julian spoke again, calm as ever. I walked into this plane prepared. Not because I needed to defend myself, but because I wanted to see something real, what people do when no one's watching, but everyone's judging. He turned to the passengers, and what I saw was exactly what I built Crestwing to eliminate. Howard Gaines shifted in his seat. So what now? You humiliate us all. Fire the crew mid-flight. Julian raised an eyebrow. No, I don't need theatrics to fix rot. He looked toward the rear galley. Mia Lang, he said clearly. You've been quiet this whole time. Why, Mia froze. The youngest of the crew, no older than 25, her face pale against the cabin lights. I just follow orders. Julian's tone remained level. Did Erica ever tell you to assess passengers based on appearance? Mia looked down at her shoes. Yes. And did you ever log objections? No, she whispered. Tara sat forward. Why not? Because, Mia's voice cracked, because she said objections were insubordination. That if we logged too many complaints from the wrong kind of passengers, we'd risk being flagged by PR. Julian turned back to Paul. Did you know that Paul shook his head? Not until now. Erica raised her voice. This is being twisted. We have a brand to protect. Our clientele expects consistency. Julian smiled faintly. You mean they expect invisibility, until someone like me refuses to disappear? He looked at Simone's display on his phone. Simone, still recording, sir. Tag and archive crew bias admission. Begin review of prior manifest irregularities past 6 months. Focus on flights commanded by Captain Erica Vaughn. Confirmed. Audit underway. Paul looked over, slowly. What? What is Protocol 7 really? Julian answered without hesitation. It's a compliance weapon built quietly within Crestwing's infrastructure. A last resort tool designed for exactly this when power is abused in closed systems that think they're safe from oversight. Howard stood. You mean you've been spying on your own airline? Julian turned to him slowly. I've been listening. There's a difference. A quiet voice rose from the middle row. It was Naya. I used to be flight crew, she said. I left after 2 years because I got tired of being told my hair looked unprofessional and my smile was aggressive. Julian looked at her with genuine regard. Thank you. Erica crossed her arms. So what's your next move? Strip my title in front of these people. Julian didn't answer right away. He approached the middle of the cabin, turned slowly to address everyone. No, I'm going to do something more permanent. He turned to Simone. Prepare internal crew status escalation. Crew status pending review. Next command. Julian's voice dropped to a steady, grounded tone. Start with the people who looked me in the eye. And still chose silence. The cabin lights hadn't dimmed yet. The atmosphere inside felt as if a spotlight had been turned on harsh, unforgiving revealing. Julian Hayes stood at the center, calm and unshaken. His phone rested on the armrest of seat 2A, Simone's voice still on standby. The legal logging chime pulsed gently every 30 seconds, reminding everyone this is on the record. He turned slowly toward the passengers, his voice low but unmistakably firm. If you've ever wondered how systems of bias stay alive, he said it's not just the people who act. It's the ones who stay quiet. Corey Blake looked down, guilt creeping across his face. Devin Walsh, still standing, straightened his back. Tara Monroe crossed her arms, defiant but composed. Nia didn't flinch. She had been through this too many times. Julian raised a single finger and pointed to the man in row 3A. "You, sir. What did you witness?" The man blinked, startled. I saw the captain confront you. She assumed you didn't belong in first class." Julian nodded. "Did you say anything?" "No. Why, I didn't know what to say." Julian turned to the woman across the aisle. "And you?" She hesitated. It was uncomfortable. I didn't want to get involved. Julian took a breath. "This is your flight. This is your aircraft. If someone in your space is mistreated and you choose silence, you don't just protect the system, you participate in it." The room absorbed his words in full silence. Then Julian gestured to Devin. "You stood." Why Devin's jaw tightened? Because I've watched this too many times. On planes, in boardrooms, at job interviews. I've been profiled. I've been mistaken for the assistant when I was the CEO. I couldn't watch it happen again. Julian nodded. "Thank you." He turned to Nia. "You," her voice didn't waver. "Because I've been erased one too many times. Told to smile more. Told my tone was hostile. I saw what was happening the moment you stepped on." Tara stepped forward. "I've been in HR for 18 years. I've coached companies through diversity audits, through EEOC filings, through restructuring after lawsuits. But this was different. This wasn't ignorance. It was arrogance." Julian looked back to the rest of the cabin. "To those who stayed seated, this is your invitation. Not to apologize, but to acknowledge. Right now. Speak up." There was a long pause. Then a man in the rear raised his hand. He was middle-aged, wearing a tailored suit, quiet until now. "I assumed you were a guest of another passenger," he admitted. "It didn't occur to me that you might be the owner." "And what did you do when you saw the confrontation?" Julian asked. "Nothing," the man replied. Julian nodded. "Honesty. That's a start." Corey finally stood, his phone lowered to his side. "I hovered over the record button," he said, "because I thought maybe going viral would help. But it felt wrong. Like I was turning someone's pain into content. I didn't speak up because I thought the camera was enough." Julian looked at him. "The camera isn't conscience. Speaking is." Corey nodded. "I understand now." Paul Kendrick shifted in his seat. "You said something earlier," he murmured, "about people revealing who they are when no one's watching. I've worked flights for 2 decades. I followed protocol, avoided conflict, stayed neutral." Julian turned to him. "There's no such thing as neutral when a line is being crossed. If you don't stop it, you're on the wrong side." Paul exhaled, shoulders sagging. "You're right." Then Julian turned to the front. "Captain Vaughn," he said, "you've led flights all over the world. What made you think I didn't belong in that seat?" Erica stood rigid. "You didn't have a premium pass. You weren't listed on my manifest." Julian tilted his head. "And what if I had been white, wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase?" Erica blinked. I don't know." "Yes, you do," Julian replied. Another passenger spoke up from row 5B. "You wouldn't have questioned it." Julian nodded. Exactly. He stepped back to the center. This cabin is now a court of public integrity. No judge, no jury, just witnesses. You've all testified now. You've seen the pattern. So I ask you this. He scanned the room, voice slowing to a whisper. What will you do when it happens again? But no one is logging the audio. That line hit like thunder. Even the hum of the engines seemed to retreat. Simone's voice came through the speaker once more. Public testimony logged. Emotional recognition patterns flagged. Cabin environment shifted. Julian nodded. Then he sat down. But the power hadn't diminished. It had transferred to everyone who had finally decided to speak. Julian Hayes sat in seat 2A now, but the weight of the room still centered on him. Across the aisle, the passengers had gone quiet, not with fear, but with the gravity of understanding. They weren't simply witnesses to a mistake. They were present at a reckoning that had clawed its way out of silence and into open air. Julian tapped his phone again. Simone, he said, with you. Retrieve internal records for cabin-related complaints last 18 months. Filter by race-coded keyword analysis. Running. Erica's arms folded tighter across her chest. You don't have the authority to request that. Julian didn't even glance at her. I own the platform, he replied. The authority isn't yours to grant or revoke. Erica opened her mouth but didn't respond. Simone's voice returned. 42 flagged incidents. 17 suppressed from flight archives. 10 connected to current crew assignments. 3 removed from corporate logs. Tara's head shot up. Suppressed, Julian nodded grimly. That means someone didn't just ignore complaints, they deleted them. A murmur rose. Devon's voice was first. Wait. These were real reports. From passengers, Julian nodded, and some were never even entered into the primary logs. Erica's eyes darted around the cabin, but Mia Lang looked like she had been struck. Julian turned toward her. Mia, he said softly, did you ever handle passenger reports? Mia's hands were trembling. I only passed them along. To whom I forwarded them to Captain Vaughn, she whispered, and sometimes to Paul. Julian's eyes moved to Paul Kendrick, who looked stunned. I only saw a handful, Paul said quickly. The rest? I didn't know there were more. Julian nodded. Then he looked back to Mia. Simone, he said. Read the first line of the deleted report from flight CW1497. Passenger noted discriminatory language from lead attendant. Was told I should be glad I got in the air at all. Filed under possible racial bias. No follow-up documented. Julian let the words hang there. The stillness in the cabin turned acidic. You filed this? He asked Mia. I did, she whispered. And then I was told it didn't match protocol, she said. Captain Vaughn said, passengers sometimes exaggerate. Julian took a breath, slow and deep. And did you believe that Mia didn't answer? Simone's voice chimed in again. Second deleted report flight, CW1732. Passenger removed after being too argumentative. Verified on review that no profanity or threats were made. Passenger was black. Complaint logged, then erased 72 hours later. Tara's voice came sharp. That's not a coincidence. Julian nodded. No, it's a culture. A culture where silence isn't passive, it's engineered. He looked around the cabin again, then leaned forward slightly, as if addressing a smaller room, more intimate. You all think this is about a seat. It's not. It's about design. Devon blinked. Design, yes, Julian said. Systemic exclusion doesn't happen by accident. It happens because systems are designed with backdoors channels where complaints go to die, where instincts replace protocols, where quiet biases wear the mask of professionalism. Erica raised her voice now, her tone more defensive than commanding. Are you suggesting I personally designed a conspiracy? No, Julian replied. I'm suggesting you operated within one, willingly. He turned to the cabin again. Who here has ever filed a complaint that never got a follow-up? 4 hands rose slowly. A man in business attire. A woman in cultural dress. Nia again. And Corey. Julian's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. That's not a flaw. That's a function. Corey lowered his hand. So what happens now? Julian stood again. What happens now is inspection. Every log, every erased file, every so-called low-priority incident that got buried because someone didn't like how a passenger looked or spoke or sat. Simone's voice came through. Back-end audit files extracted. Source of deletion traced. Julian turned back to Mia. Simone, he said, read the authorization tag for the deleted files. Lang M27. A gasp moved through the cabin. Mia covered her mouth with both hands. Julian's voice lowered. You didn't just forward the complaints, he said. You had deletion rights. Mia whispered I was trying to protect the crew. I was told if there were too many incidents from unverified profiles, the cabin would lose its executive status. You were told that Tara asked eyes wide. Yes, Mia sobbed. By Erica. Julian looked toward Erica again. She said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Julian's final line in this part landed like a verdict. You didn't just remove people from seats, you removed them from the record. Erica Vaughn stood at the front of the cabin, eyes darting across the faces staring back at her. Where there had once been deference, now there was scrutiny. Her posture remained rigid, but her footing was crumbling. Julian Hayes remained still, but everyone could feel the tectonic shift under her feet and his. You didn't just remove people from seats, he repeated. You removed them from the record. Simone's voice returned over the speaker. Mr. Hayes' system audit complete. 17 incident deletions confirmed. Authorization confirmed as Lang M27 under command hierarchy of Vaughn E1. Julian nodded. Archive the full audit trail. Begin corporate escalation. Escalation in motion. HR, legal, and media flagged. Erica's jaw clenched. You've made your point. Julian turned to her. No, you made mine. He stepped forward now, slowly, deliberately. As he walked, his shoes sounded too loud in the quiet of the cabin. But he wasn't rushing. He was reclaiming. This jet, he said, gesturing to the polished walls and ambient lighting, was designed for elite comfort. It's marketed as refined, seamless, dignified. But what's the worth of a premium product? When its gatekeepers operate with prejudice, no one answered. They didn't need to, because everyone had seen it now. Julian stopped at the center of the aisle. Simone, he said, voice. Even open operational override. Ready. By executive order, suspend all active command authority for Captain Erica Vaughn, effective immediately. A mechanical beep echoed softly from the cockpit door. Command suspension logged. Override approved. Erica Vaughn marked as inactive crew. Paul Kendrick blinked in disbelief. She's no longer captain. Julian turned to him. Not anymore. Erica stepped forward, eyes wide. You can't strip rank from the flight deck mid-transit. Julian looked at her calm, unimpressed. You did that yourself. All I did was confirm it. Another chime sounded. New command leadership requested. Please nominate replacement. Julian nodded. Simone assigned Paul Kendrick interim flight lead. Operational command temporary pending formal review. Paul's breath caught. Me. Julian nodded. You've made mistakes, but you owned them, and that's leadership. Erica's face was crimson. You're replacing me with him. Yes, Julian said flatly. Because he paused. You escalated. Simone confirmed the change. Command authority shifted. Paul Kendrick acknowledged as acting captain. Cabin control rerouted. Communications restored. Suddenly, the cabin lights flickered. Once then, returned. Everyone knew what had just happened. Power had officially changed hands. Julian turned to face the passengers. "Let me be clear," he said. "This is not a humiliation. It's a correction. What happens after today doesn't depend on apologies. It depends on action." He looked toward Tara. "What happens when bias becomes protocol?" Tara's voice was steady. "It metastasizes, and then it hides." Julian nodded. "Not anymore." Howard Gaines, who had gone quiet for the past several minutes, finally stood. "This is a circus. You've created a mutiny." Julian didn't even blink. "No. You're watching the system repair itself in real time." He stepped closer to Howard. "And if that makes you uncomfortable, then good. Comfort never built justice." Howard scoffed. "So what's next? You going to throw us all off the plane?" Julian's tone remained level. "No, but your Crestwing credentials have already been revoked," Simone confirmed. "Howard Gaines and affiliates blacklisted across all Crestwing properties." Howard's jaw dropped. "You can't do that." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You mocked me. You encouraged removal. You disrespected this cabin." "I can. And I just did." Across the room, Devon Walsh folded his arms, nodding slowly. "This is what it looks like when consequences finally catch up." Erica, still frozen, stepped forward again. "You think removing me makes this right?" Julian faced her fully. "No. Removing you stops it from continuing." Simone spoke again. "Internal teams have been notified. HR response units prepared. Cabin audio logs distributed to legal and operations for transparency archive." Tara looked across the aisle at Mia Lang, who sat motionless. "You still think silence was protecting anyone?" she asked quietly. Mia shook her head, barely holding back tears. "I thought, if I stayed quiet, I'd survive." Julian's voice softened, but it didn't lose its strength. "Survival isn't the same as complicity, but it's a short walk." He turned back to the front. "This cabin will land differently today. Not just on a runway, but in the record books." Then, for the first time since boarding, Julian addressed Paul directly with something more than direction. "You have the controls now," he said. Paul nodded, unsure but accepting. Julian looked back at the passengers. "And to the rest of you, this is not the end. It's the beginning of how flights like this will run, not with hierarchy, but with humanity." Erica Vaughn stood beside the cockpit door like a statue, except statues didn't shake. Her hands, once symbols of authority, now twitched in small, uncontrollable spasms. She hadn't left the front, hadn't said another word since Julian Hayes issued the override. But her presence clung to the cabin like leftover smoke, visible heavy and unwanted. Julian had taken his seat. Paul Kendrick, now acting captain, stood awkwardly near the forward service panel. He didn't bark commands. He didn't even make eye contact. He was absorbing it, all the authority handed to him, the silence he'd once enabled, the shifting weight of responsibility. Then it happened. One passenger rose. Devon Walsh. Slowly, intentionally, he turned not to Julian, not to Paul, but to Erica. "I will not be following your instructions," he said. "You no longer speak for this aircraft." The statement wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It carried more force than 100 complaints. Corey Blake stood next. "Same here," he said. "You had power, and you used it to police dignity." A third voice joined them, an older woman in row 4. "I watched you humiliate him. I watched you accuse him without proof. And I said nothing. That ends now." One by one, passengers stood not for protest, not for drama, but for clarity. Tara Monroe stood with them. "We fly with truth," she said, "or we don't fly at all." Julian glanced toward Erica. She took a half-step back, eyes wide, lips parting like she might speak, but nothing came out. Paul looked from the crowd to Julian, then to Erica. "What do I do?" he asked under his breath. Julian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around at the standing passengers, and then he stood with them. "All command begins with consent," he said aloud. "You're watching that consent get revoked." He turned to Paul. "You asked what to do. Listen to the cabin." Paul swallowed hard. "I hear them." He took a breath and turned to Erica. "Captain Vaughn, you are relieved of all voice authority. You will not address this cabin again." Erica's mouth dropped open. "You don't have." "Yes, I do," Paul said with a steadiness that surprised even him. "You escalated a situation. You deleted records. You ignored the chain of accountability. And you compromised the integrity of this flight." Simone's voice came in clear and unbothered. Statement logged. Crew rank invalidation confirmed. Command permissions blocked from Vaughn E1 terminal. The crew tablet in Erica's hand blinked, then shut down. She looked down, stared, tried the buttons. Nothing. Paul looked to Mia Lang next. "You deleted reports." "I was told to," she whispered. "And you followed orders." Mia's voice cracked. "I thought I was protecting the crew." "You weren't," Paul replied. "You were erasing truth." He turned to Simone. "Log crew breach for Lang M27. Suspend operations. She is no longer acting in cabin crew capacity. Confirmed. Lang M27 suspended. Access revoked. Seat reassignment pending." Mia lowered herself into the nearest empty seat, her hands over her face. She didn't resist. She didn't defend. She just wept. Howard Gaines stood again. "Oh, this is ridiculous," he spat. "What's next?" "You going to let passengers run the cockpit?" Julian turned toward him. "No," he said. "We're letting conscience run the cabin." Tara looked directly at Howard. "You think this is chaos? This is what accountability looks like. It's just louder than you're used to." Howard laughed bitterly. "You'll crash this airline." Julian didn't smile. "We're not crashing anything. We're grounding what was already spiraling." Then Nia stood. She hadn't said much since her first declaration, but now her voice carried weight. "This jet is a case study. One you didn't plan. One no press agent scripted. One no crisis manager can bury." She turned toward Julian. "You didn't just show us the cracks. You forced the light in." Julian gave a soft nod. Cracks let the truth breathe. He turned to Paul. "Let's bring this flight home. But not in the air. We land now on principle." Paul nodded slower this time, not out of fear, but with clarity. He turned to the intercom and pressed the manual override. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your acting captain. We're returning to the terminal. This flight will not proceed until a full corporate review is complete. Thank you for your honesty. And for your courage." A quiet applause rose, not thunderous, not forced, but real. A quiet rebellion had become something bigger, the start of reform. The plane began its descent, but the cabin had already landed in a different place, one where silence no longer ruled, and injustice could no longer hide behind polished uniforms and hollow policies. Julian Hayes sat quietly in seat 2A as the seatbelt sign chimed on. But he wasn't preparing for landing. He was preparing for transformation. The voice of acting captain Paul Kendrick came over the intercom once more. "Steady now, ladies and gentlemen, per executive order. We are returning to Crestwing's private terminal for immediate inspection and crew reassignment. Please remain seated. Corporate oversight is standing by." No one complained. No one groaned about delay. They understood this wasn't about time lost. It was about history being made. Howard Gaines crossed his arms, sulking, but even he didn't speak. Tara had glanced at him once with a look that said, "Try it." He didn't. Julian's phone vibrated softly. He tapped the screen. "Simone. Sir. Status of ground support. Crestwing Executive Response Team is in position at Terminal 3. Security, Legal, and HR are on site. Fleet Management also present. Purpose awaiting your live briefing. All authority deferred to your judgment." Julian paused. Deferred. Not consulted. Not negotiated. Deferred. He took a breath and let it sit in his lungs like steam before exhaling slowly. "Prepare a statement," he said. "Title Grounded Revolution." Confirmed. The wheels touched down with a hiss and soft shudder. And just like that, they were home, but not back. Back implied they'd be resuming something. This wasn't resumption. This was a rewrite. As the aircraft taxied, passengers craned their necks toward the window. A line of Crestwing executives, all in charcoal suits and serious eyes, stood waiting in front of the hangar doors. There were no red carpets, no PR banners, just solemn readiness. Mia Lang stared at them in disbelief. Are they here to protect us?" Julian didn't look at her. "No, they're here to witness you." She looked away, quietly, swallowing tears she no longer had the energy to wipe. The plane came to a full stop. The lights dimmed briefly, then rose. The cabin fell into a silence that wasn't tense, just waiting. Julian stood. Paul Kendrick moved to the cabin mic and spoke once more. "Doors will remain closed until Mr. Hayes addresses all internal departments. He is acting with full executive authority. Please wait for further instruction." The door to the jet bridge opened a crack, and one of the corporate leads stepped inside. Not a PR rep, not an assistant. It was Elise Garber, Chief of Corporate Culture, second only to the CEO of Crestwing Global. She looked directly at Julian. He nodded once. "Are you ready to take this public?" she asked. Julian's voice was calm. "It's already public." Behind Elise, a tablet streamed the cabin feed to internal staff systems. "You want this handled internally?" she asked. "No," he replied. "I want it handled truthfully." Elise looked toward Erica Vaughn, who had remained near the cockpit the entire flight. She was pale now, eyes flickering with panic, masked as control. "I didn't mean," she began, but Julian raised a hand. "No spin," he said. "No pleas. No negotiations. Today isn't about intent, it's about impact." Erica went silent. Julian stepped into the aisle and turned to the passengers. "I need two things," he said. "First, your permission to represent this moment not as a scandal, but a standard." A murmur of agreement rippled through the rows. Tara Monroe stood again. "You have mine." Devon followed. "And mine." Corey raised his hand. "Let the world see. All of it." Julian nodded once. "Second," he said, "I need you to understand that what you did today, standing, speaking, refusing to be silent, wasn't just bravery. It was blueprint." He looked back at Elise. "Send the signal." Elise tapped her tablet. Broadcast initiated. Internal and partner channels live. Julian stepped toward the jet's galley and turned to face the camera embedded discreetly in the overhead bulkhead. To every member of Crestwing, every partner airline, every private charter crew, and every executive who thinks policy is enough, watch closely. He paused. "This is how you land a broken system." His voice echoed, not just in the cabin but across every device, every screen, every terminal linked to the Crestwing ecosystem. He turned toward the crew voice, sharpened. "Effective immediately, Erica Vaughn, Mia Lang, and Howard Gaines are permanently barred from Crestwing service employment and partnerships. Their records will reflect cause-based dismissal." Erica gasped audibly. Howard tried to step forward, but security had already boarded. Elise nodded to the escort team. They were removed quietly, efficiently. Respectfully, but decisively. Julian continued. "Paul Kendrick will be placed on administrative probation pending formal review, but effective today, he will assist in rebuilding the training systems that failed him." Paul looked down, then up, then nodded. "Passengers of this flight." Julian concluded, "You will each receive a record of today's events unedited. You were not just guests. You were the jury. And now you're part of the reform." The broadcast ended. No applause, just stillness, the kind that meant the ground had shifted, and the industry would never fly the same again. The cabin door closed behind the last removed crew member. For the first time in hours, the jet was still not in stasis, but in relief. Not just physically landed, but ethically grounded. Julian Hayes hadn't sat back down yet. His body was upright, but not rigid. His face was calm, but not complacent. Passengers began settling. Some whispered. Others stared ahead, quiet in thought. No one pulled out a phone. No one checked email. They were still in the moment. Paul Kendrick stood beside Tara, whispering thanks for her voice earlier. Mia Lung's empty seat remained unoccupied, an unspoken tribute to the truth that had finally filled the space. Then someone spoke. A voice from the back. Fragile, refined, but sharp. I've seen her before. Everyone turned. In seat 8C, an older black woman slowly stood, her posture regal, her white scarf tucked into a vintage green overcoat. She clutched a worn handbag with both hands. All eyes found her. Even Julian turned. "She threw me off a flight," the woman said, her voice unwavering. 20 years ago." No one moved. Julian took a step toward her. "You mean Erica Vaughn?" She nodded. "I was younger, just promoted to partner at a firm. I'd never flown private, but the CEO had booked me on Crestwing's legacy division back when they called it Blue Horizon Charter." A quiet intake of breath spread across the cabin. I boarded wearing a Navy suit, sat in seat 2B, just like now. Erica Vaughn was first officer then. She walked up, looked at me, and said, "Sweetheart, first class, isn't the maid's lounge?" Devon's mouth fell open. Corey visibly winced. She told the lead captain I must have snuck in. My boarding pass had gotten wet ink faded. They asked me to wait at the terminal for clarification. The jet took off without me. Julian stepped closer. "What did you do?" I cried, she said simply. Then I took a cab home. Told my husband I missed the meeting. Nia covered her mouth, shaken. Julian nodded once carefully. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Ruth," she said. "Ruth Kinley." Julian blinked. "Ruth Kinley, from Kinley and Trask LLP." She smiled faintly. "Retired now. But yes," Ma'am Paul said slowly. "You're a legend in civil rights law." "I was," she replied. "Then I started losing cases. Not because I was wrong, but because the systems were just better at hiding how they were right in public, but wrong in process." Julian turned to face the passengers again. "This isn't coincidence," he said. "This is continuity." Ruth continued. "I never filed a report. No one would have believed me. I wasn't Julian Hayes. I wasn't CEO of anything. I was just another black woman who didn't look like she belonged." Tara stepped forward. Today proved that belonging doesn't have a dress code. Ruth nodded. It was overdue. Devon whispered, "How many people like you sat down for decades told to stay quiet so the plane could take off?" Ruth looked him square in the eye. "All of them. Every woman in heels. Every man in sneakers. Every kid carrying promise, but not pedigree." Julian's throat tightened, but he didn't let it show. "Ruth, He said you're not in 2B anymore. You're in 1A. And not because you moved, because the world did. Ruth smiled again. I stayed quiet once. I won't do it again. She looked at Nia. When you speak, they hear me too. Nia nodded, a tear tracing her cheek. Julian turned back to the cabin. You all just became part of a movement. And now that you know the story isn't new, you know the silence wasn't either. He gestured gently toward the cabin walls. Look at where we are. We were 35,000 feet above the ground, and it took that high for truth to break through. What does that say about how far we bury it? No one answered. He didn't need them to. Tara leaned forward, voice measured. This wasn't a revolt. It was a resurrection. Corey said softly. Of what she replied. Dignity. The stillness returned, but this time it felt earned. It wasn't suspense, it was respect. A turning point, not just for Crestwing Aviation, but for every quiet injustice that ever happened between a check-in counter and a jet bridge. And as Ruth Kinley sat down in 1A, she whispered under her breath, It took 20 years, but we finally landed right. The engines had gone quiet, but inside the jet, the room was just beginning to stir. Julian Hayes remained standing near the aisle, the weight of what had just happened, Ruth Kinley's revelation, still lingering in the air. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't posturing. He was listening. And so was everyone else. From the rear galley to the tip of first class, the silence had become something else now. Not awkwardness. Not suspense. It was anticipation, the kind that happens just before testimony. Julian spoke with calm purpose. We've grounded this flight, not because it couldn't fly, but because the structure carrying it was already cracked. He looked around the cabin, his voice rising just enough. If we're serious about reform, we have to understand what we're fixing. So let's start with this question. When have you seen the system protect itself by shaming someone else? A beat of silence. Then Devon stood. 3 months ago, he said. I flew out of LaGuardia. Black teenager in a hoodie boarded behind me. Seat 4B. He asked for a ginger ale. Flight attendant told him he needed to speak more clearly. She never brought the drink. Julian nodded. What did you do? Devon hesitated. Nothing. I stared at my laptop and pretended I didn't hear. Julian didn't shame him. He just said, Thank you for telling the truth. Then Corey stood. Dallas, he said. Last year. I watched an older white man yell at a Filipino gate agent about his seat upgrade. She apologized. Her supervisor came over and told her to go home early, like it was her fault. Tara rose next. Pre-boarding lane at JFK. A Middle Eastern woman in a hijab was asked twice to verify her identity, even after the scanner beeped green. The white woman behind her walked through without a glance. Nia added quietly, And I once saw a staff member roll her eyes when an elderly black man asked where to stow his walker. She muttered, Shouldn't fly if you need help walking. The confessions came faster now. Not shouted. Not theatrical. Just real. An Indian man from row 6 spoke up. Newark. My boarding pass said business. The agent scanned it, looked at me, then asked to see it again. I gave it to her. She held it up to the light. I'd printed it at home, and she said, You could have made this yourself. A woman in her 40s raised her hand. Denver. My son is autistic. Nonverbal. He was fidgeting before takeoff. The flight attendant told us we'd be removed unless he calmed down. He wasn't screaming. He was excited. And I was humiliated. Paul Kendrick, still near the front, closed his eyes for a moment. Every one of these is real, he said. Voice hoarse. And I've seen versions of all of them. I stayed quiet because I thought following protocol was protecting order. but I see now it was just protecting power. Julian took a deep breath. He turned to Ruth Kinley, who remained seated, calm, observant. "Ms. Kinley," he said gently, "you spent your life fighting discrimination in courtrooms. Does this look like justice to you?" She smiled faintly. "No," she replied. "This looks like testimony, but testimony is where justice begins." Julian turned back to the cabin. "Today, this plane is not a flight," he said. "It's a record, one that was never meant to exist, but now must." He tapped his smartwatch. "Simone, with you. Create a new corporate policy, the 8C mandate. Every crew every month must listen to a 60-minute session of passenger testimonies, real, anonymized, unfiltered, from people like these. Drafting now. 8C mandate logged." Devon blinked, named after Ruth. Julian nodded. She didn't scream. She didn't protest. She remembered and reminded. Tara stepped forward. "I want to add to that," she said. "If you're building policy off pain, don't let it end in silence again." Julian looked at her. "What do you suggest?" She took a breath. "Add the passenger statement option. Every boarding pass, physical or digital, has a one-tap link to report disrespect before or after takeoff. Not a customer complaint. A statement of dignity." Julian looked to Simone. Noted. Policy linked to boarding QR. Field labeled Respect Check. Implementation ready within 72 hours. Corey let out a quiet breath. "This plane isn't grounded," he murmured. "It's a courtroom." Julian heard it, turned, smiled faintly. "No, it's a blueprint." He looked around. "We can't go back to what this flight started as. Not after what it's become." Ruth Kinley nodded in quiet agreement. Then softly, she said, "The truth didn't board this plane. It waited for us to earn it." The cabin was quiet, but no one was done speaking. Passengers who had once just wanted to get from point A to point B now sat upright, their thoughts racing faster than the plane ever had. Julian Hayes had turned this aircraft from a vessel of transit into a vehicle of transformation. And he wasn't finished. He looked out the small, round window beside seat 2A. Outside, the sun had fully risen, casting long gold lines across the tarmac. But inside, something brighter had begun illumination without sunlight. "This isn't just a policy shift," Julian said, slowly eyes sweeping across the cabin. "It's a cultural reset." He rose again, not because he had to, but because it felt right to meet this moment on his feet. "What happens next," he continued, "will determine whether this was a correction or a beginning." Passengers turned to face him. No one checked the time. Julian tapped his watch. "Simone, with you, Mr. Hayes, draft an executive initiative, title Legacy in Motion, logging." "What does it contain?" Julian turned to Tara Monroe. "You once said real reform is lived, not memorized. I want to build that into steel and altitude." Tara blinked. I mean this aircraft will no longer return to standard rotation." "Not ever." The cabin stirred. Murmurs rose. Corey leaned forward. "Wait," what Julian turned back to Simone. "Effective immediately reclassify this aircraft under Crestwing Division Alpha. Remove it from commercial use. Register it under Initiative LIM-01. Confirmed." Aircraft registration changed. Division Alpha established. Devon stood. "What are you doing?" Julian took a breath. "This jet is no longer a flight. It's a classroom." A hush fell over the passengers. "I want every new hire pilot crew executive to step inside this exact cabin walk. These aisles, sit in these seats, and listen to what happened here today," Nia whispered. "A living archive." Julian nodded. "This is now the Crestwing Legacy aircraft. Not because we crashed, because we refused to take off under broken terms." Tara stepped forward. "And who tells the story?" Julian didn't hesitate. You do. He turned to Devon. You. To Ruth Kinley. You. To Paul Kendrick. You especially. Paul blinked, stunned. Me, you stood still when you should have stepped up. But then you did. And that's what leadership looks like. Imperfect. Uncomfortable. But honest. Corey asked, "What about us passengers?" Julian's voice warmed. "You're not passengers anymore. You're witnesses. Your voices in the recording. Your statements will become part of the standard onboarding material for every hire, every route, every partner firm that dares call itself inclusive." Simone's voice returned. Training module. Shell prepared. Interactive cabin overlay system will use today's seating chart as baseline reference. Ruth Kinley stood slowly using the headrest for balance. "This plane is not a memorial," she said. "It's a reckoning. And if you're turning it into a place where people finally get seen, then you've changed the purpose of flight itself." Julian smiled faintly. "Visibility," he said, "should never need altitude." Nia added, "But it sure helps people hear you when they won't listen at ground level." They all laughed softly, not in humor, but in understanding. Julian looked to the galley, then the cockpit, then back to the cabin. "This plane," he said, "will never sell a seat again. But it will save one. For the next person who looks like they don't belong until they realize they do." Simone spoke again. "Mr. Hayes, legal has approved the full charter designation. The aircraft is now coded as a cultural reinforcement unit under federal non-commercial classification." Paul turned to Julian. "You just turned this jet into a flying case study." "No," Julian said quietly. "Into a flying legacy." Corey shook his head in awe. "We didn't book a flight. We walked into a legacy." Tara smiled. "One that won't show up on boarding passes, but on policy papers." Devon leaned back, arms crossed. "Never thought missing a connection would change my life." Ruth Kinley gave him a wink. "You didn't miss anything. You connected to something bigger." Julian nodded at them all. "This isn't about revenge. It's not even about justice. It's about memory. Memory with wings." He looked around one last time. No more invisible passengers, no more hidden voices, and no more silent departures. A long pause. Then Julian said, "When this plane lifts again, it won't carry travelers." He smiled. "It will carry truth." Julian Hayes hadn't moved from his position in the aisle, but what he was about to share would shift the cabin more than turbulence ever could. "We've grounded this aircraft," he began, "and now we've given it a new mission." He glanced toward seat 2A, where his phone lay face up on the armrest, the screen glowing with a real-time data feed. "But legacy," he continued, "can't be built on memory alone. It has to be recorded, not just remembered, not just believed. Proven." He turned toward Paul Kendrick. "What if you hadn't confessed?" Paul looked away, ashamed. Julian scanned the cabin. What if Ruth hadn't spoken? No one replied. Julian walked forward slowly toward the cockpit door. This plane carried 24 passengers, but it also carried observation. Tara leaned forward. "Observation." Julian nodded. "This aircraft is outfitted with a prototype system, one I had designed after seeing too many he said, she said conflicts where nothing could be confirmed. It's called Eyes in the Sky." He tapped his smartwatch. Simone. Activated. Without a sound, the overhead lights in the cabin dimmed slightly. A soft blue pulse ran along the ceiling, barely visible. "This system doesn't just record, it learns," Julian said. "It watches for bias indicators, tone, phrasing, proximity, repetition, micro-behavior." Nia blinked. "Like AI surveillance." Not for punishment, Julian clarified. For pattern recognition. We're not policing tone. We're decoding intent, Corey asked. How does it know? Simone replied through the overhead audio. Eyes in the Sky uses a hybrid of acoustic emotion modeling, gaze tracking, and linguistic contrast analysis. It doesn't guess feelings. It measures deviations. Julian picked up the phone. Most surveillance systems punish in retrospect. This one teaches in real time. Flight attendants will receive haptic feedback on their wristbands the moment unconscious bias crosses a behavioral threshold. Devon raised his eyebrows. Wait, you're saying it alerts them while it's happening? Yes, Julian said, and provides them an immediate coaching cue. Quiet, discreet, but educational, Paul whispered. So I would have known you would have felt it buzz before you said what you didn't realize was loaded, Julian replied. Silence. Then Ruth Kinley spoke gently. This is more than accountability. It's retraining instinct. Julian nodded. That's the goal, Tara asked. How long has this been active? Julian looked around the cabin. Since Wheels Up. Gasps rippled through the rows. You recorded this? Corey asked, stunned. Julian nodded. All of it. Not just the words, but the silences, the diverted eyes, the interruptions, the moments someone flinched before responding. Paul's face went pale. I didn't know. You weren't meant to, Julian said softly, because I wanted to see what this system saw without interference. He held up the screen. A wireframe rendering of the cabin appeared dotted with color-coded behavior notations, dismissive response, visual avoidance, interruptive entry proximity, aggression, and one label flashing in gold, defensive truth activation. What's that one mean? Devon asked, pointing to the gold. Julian smiled. That's the moment you stood up for someone. Devon swallowed hard. Nia murmured, You built a moral black box. Julian nodded again. And when a plane crashes, we study the data. But when dignity crashes, we usually bury it. Tara said, Not anymore. Julian stepped back. This aircraft is no longer just a classroom. It's a mirror. Every flight under Legacy in Motion will use this tech. Corey frowned. Won't that feel intrusive? Julian met his gaze directly. More intrusive than being humiliated in silence, more invasive than being removed from your seat without explanation. Corey's face softened. Point taken. Ruth Kinley said. The best part. You're not using this for lawsuits. You're using it for learning. That's what changes culture. Julian looked toward the forward camera lens. This isn't about punishment. It's about pattern interruption. If we can catch bias when it starts before it becomes a crisis, we don't need a Julian Hayes in every seat. We just need better reflexes. Simone's voice returned. System diagnostics complete. Cabin behavioral heat map available. Would you like to show passengers? Julian paused, then said yes. The ceiling dimmed again. A soft projection illuminated above each row. It showed simple color codes, green for neutral blue, for supportive red for problematic. Nobody was labeled, but the pattern was clear. Most of the cabin glowed green and blue. Rows 2 and 3 Erica Howard Mia still flashed red, and near seat 8C Ruth's row pulsed gold. Recognition. Tears welled in Nia's eyes. Julian turned to the passengers one last time. This system will be deployed fleet-wide within 90 days. Every cabin will not just fly passengers, it will learn from them. He smiled. And maybe then, we'll stop asking who belongs and start asking how we serve. The cabin had transformed from a vessel of injustice into a theater of truth, and the curtain wasn't closing yet. Julian Hayes remained standing now beside seat 3C, glancing toward his glowing smartwatch. The system's behavioral map still shimmered across the ceiling, the passengers silent beneath its blue and green hues. This was just one flight, he said. Voice low, but resolute. But we're not treating it as an outlier. We're treating it as evidence. He tapped the screen once. Simone. Here, Mr. Hayes. Begin full audit. Pull the last 18 months of cabin data from Crestwing charter logs. Filter by flights where Erica Vaughn, Mia Lang, or Howard Gaines were active. Running query now. Cross-referencing security flags, silent deplaning incidents, and unexplained downgrade complaints. The silence turned electric. Passengers leaned in. Nia clutched the seat in front of her. Paul Kendrick stood straighter. Julian didn't blink. How many? Simone's pause was brief but heavy. 62 flagged incidents across 18 months. Gasps filled the cabin. 32 involved Erica Vaughn directly. 27 involved Mia Lang. 23 passenger records were deleted prior to HR escalation. Tara's mouth dropped open. Deleted, she whispered. Julian nodded grimly. Erased. Silenced. Just like Ruth's story. Just like mine until today. Devon stepped forward. What were the patterns? Simone replied without hesitation. Racial profiling of boarding status. Reassignment from first to economy without cause. In-flight neglect of meal service. Passenger intimidation via security threats. Verbal dismissal categorized as crew discretion. Paul Kendrick swallowed hard. And we never investigated, Simone continued. Only 3 official reports were filed. None escalated. 2 were marked inconclusive due to lack of recording. 1 was signed off by Mia Lang. Corey said it aloud. We weren't just flying blind. We were burying the black box. Julian turned back to the passengers. This is why we built Eyes in the Sky. Not for punishment, but to restore what silence took away. He walked toward the forward galley. Simone, he said, prepare these 62 reports for review. Would you like legal authorization first? Julian didn't flinch. No, I want public transparency. Strip names. Keep facts. Mask personal ID. Release the trend line to our company-wide equity portal. Tara's eyes widened. You're opening the vault. Julian nodded. Truth should never need permission to breathe. Simone confirmed files redacted. Uploading to Crestwing Cultural Integrity Portal. Completion in 30 seconds. Paul Kendrick ran a hand through his hair. We trained them. We promoted them. And we enabled them. Julian looked directly at him. And now you rebuild them, not just as people, as precedents. Ruth Kinley's voice rose gently from 8C. I've fought 42 discrimination suits. 1/2. Lost the rest. But none of them began with this much data. She smiled faintly. And none of them ended with a CEO showing receipts instead of speeches. Simone's voice returned. Upload complete. 62 case summaries available. Top 3 locations: LAX, Atlanta, and Boston. Most targeted demographic black men aged 30-55 in executive attire. Nia whispered. So it wasn't about noise or behavior. It was profile. Julian nodded. They weren't reacting to conduct. They were reacting to existence. Corey added, that's not enforcement. That's ritual. Julian looked toward the cockpit door. And that ritual ends today. Then he turned to Mia Lang's now empty jump seat. I want to be clear, he said, voice slow. I don't take joy in firing people. I take responsibility. Because it wasn't just her job to do better. It was our job to watch sooner. Paul Kendrick looked at his feet. Julian placed a hand on his shoulder. You failed. But now you lead. That's how you earn the uniform again. Tara stepped beside him. And what about the rest of the crews? What about the ones who didn't get caught? Julian turned back to Simone. Send notification to every employee in the system. Flight crew gate agents, schedulers, customer relations. What message, sir? He looked straight ahead. 2 sentences. He inhaled. Bias leaves a trail, and we're following it. Simone confirmed, message scheduled. 38274 recipients. Delivery confirmed. A silence followed, but it wasn't fear. It was momentum. Devon broke it with a half-smile. So, what now? Julian glanced around the room. Eyes met his, some afraid, some grateful, some finally awake. We begin again, he said, and this time, we fly higher. Julian Hayes stood in the aisle facing a cabin no longer divided by status, but by silence, memory, and awakening. Behind him, the behavioral heat map still glowed faintly above each row. In front of him, 23 passengers waited not to land, but to understand. This plane, Julian began, was built for distance, not just physical, but social. He tapped the armrest beside him. Rows, aisles, bulkheads, all created to signal worth without saying a word. Tara Munro raised an eyebrow. You mean the cabin layout itself? Julian nodded. We've spent decades refining luxury seating to feel better, not to be better. What if the design of these cabins is part of the problem? A few passengers looked around, noticing for the first time how the rows tapered into smaller seats toward the rear. The same aircraft, the same destination, but radically different experiences. Julian turned to Nia Turner. You're a designer. She blinked. Yes. Tell me something honestly. When was the last time someone asked you to redesign privilege? Nia paused, then said quietly, Never. Julian smiled. Today's your first assignment. He faced the cabin. Simone, clear all assigned seating. Confirming. All seat assignments voided. Chimes sounded overhead as screens flashed. Reassignment in progress. Devon leaned forward. Wait, what does that mean? Julian stepped to the center of the aisle. It means you're moving. Passengers exchanged glances, confused. Julian raised his voice slightly. Every one of you will now be seated by a different metric. Not ticket price, not loyalty tier. Testimony. A beat of stunned silence. Tara asked, You're reassigning seats based on how people behave today. Julian nodded. Those who spoke up first, you'll sit in the front. He turned to Ruth Kinley. You start us off. Seat 1A is yours. Ruth blinked her eyes wide. I don't need. It's not about reward. Julian cut in. It's about presence. You modeled it. You earned this view. She stood slowly. The cabin watched her walk forward. Not as a passenger, as a pillar. Julian continued. Those who stayed silent longest, respectfully, I ask you to sit in the back. Not as punishment, but as perspective. Paul Kendrick stood without protest. Understood. He moved toward the final row. Julian looked to Nia, Tara, Devon, Corey. All of you, mid-cabin. You didn't lead the charge. But when the fire caught, you carried the torch. They moved quietly. No objections. No shame. Julian waited until all had relocated. Then he spoke again. Look around. He gestured broadly. You're in different seats now. Same people. Same names. Same worth. But how does it feel? A pause. Devon broke it. Uncomfortable. Exposed. Like I'm being evaluated for where I sit. Corey nodded. And realizing, I always was. Julian nodded. Exactly. He stepped into the aisle. The aisle isn't just for walking. It's a symbol. One side whispers, deserve. The other, accept. But when we decide who sits where based on courage, not class, the aisle becomes irrelevant. Tara leaned into the armrest. No more aisle between us. Julian smiled. Now say that again, but louder. She sat up straighter. Her voice rang clear. No more aisles between us. A few heads turned. Devon echoed her. No more aisles between us. Ruth joined in. No more aisles between us. Then Naya, Corey, even Paul. The phrase moved like a wave. No more aisles between us. It wasn't a chant. It was a promise. Julian waited until it faded, then said, "That's our new design principle." Nia, when we rebuild these cabins, we don't just remove seats. We remove separation. Every new plane will carry a memory of this layout, of how it felt to be asked to move, not because of cost, but because of character. Nia whispered, "That's revolutionary." Julian replied, "It's overdue." Simone's voice returned. "Shall I document these reassignments for inclusion in training?" Julian said firmly. "Yes. Label it Courage Configuration Flight 3177. Logged." He turned back to the passengers. "This exercise isn't about seats. It's about sight. If you can see each other beyond assumptions, beyond ticket class, beyond silence, then we've already taken off." A pause. Then Ruth Kinley, seated now in 1A, adjusted her scarf and whispered, "I've been fighting for this kind of shift my whole life." Julian responded softly, "Today." It shifted. The cabin had just begun to settle from the seating transformation when Julian's smartwatch vibrated. He glanced down. Incoming call, Crestwing Executive Board encrypted line. He inhaled. This was expected. Feared by some. But for Julian Hayes, welcomed. He tapped the screen. "Simone," he said calmly, "wrote the call to cabin speaker. Let them all hear it." "Are you sure, sir?" "Absolutely." A soft chime rang through the cabin's audio system. Then a clipped corporate voice spoke. "Julian, this is Meredith Langford, interim chair. We've just been informed that Flight 3177 has been grounded mid-schedule without FAA emergency classification. You've overridden cabin controls, suspended standard route assignments, and launched a public audit from inside an active aircraft." Julian stood in the aisle facing the passengers. "Yes, Meredith," he replied. "All of that is true. You're putting us at risk. Legal's concerned about exposure, media leaks, shareholder reaction." He stepped closer to the intercom. "Then let them hear this too." He looked to the passengers. "Who here was silenced, profiled, humiliated, or witnessed it?" Before I stepped in, hands went up. One by one. Slow. Certain. Real. Ruth Kinley stood first. Row 8C. I was dismissed and ignored until I became inconvenient. Devon followed. Row 4D. I watched the profiling. Then I spoke. Then I moved. Paul Kendrick stood. Row 9A. I obeyed orders when I should have intervened. I own that. Nia rose next. I was quiet, but I saw it, and I felt it. Tara added, "We weren't passengers. We were categories." A heavy silence. Then Meredith's voice came through again. "This isn't the time for speeches. We're asking you to justify halting operations across 3 time zones." Julian smiled, the kind of calm that carried conviction. "Then, let me be clear. I halted operations not because the jet was broken, but because the culture was." Corey Blake stood now facing the intercom like it was a podium. "You want justification?" This plane became a courtroom, a classroom, a reckoning. You can't put that back in a hangar. Meredith's tone sharpened. "Julian, the board voted 5-2 to suspend the Legacy and Motion Initiative pending internal review. They've asked me to notify you before further steps are taken." Julian raised an eyebrow. Did the board hear any of these voices? "That's not protocol." Then protocol, he said firmly, is the problem. He looked around the cabin. "Anyone here want to speak to the board directly?" Without hesitation, Ruth Kinley stepped forward, took the handset from the wall, lifted it like it was her courtroom mic. "This is Ruth Kinley," she said, voice steeled with quiet fire. Civil rights attorney. 42 years in federal courtrooms. I've flown over 200 times with your airline." She paused. "And today is the first time I landed something worth keeping." Gasps. Nods. Devon stepped forward, hand over his heart. Devon Walsh, Marketing Director. "I came on this flight as a professional. I leave as a believer. In him. In this system. And in the idea that reform doesn't start with press releases. It starts here." Nia stood too. This jet didn't get grounded. It got honest. If your board can't tell the difference, maybe they need to fly coach for once. Corey raised his hand. Corey Blake. Just a regular guy. But I watched a man get nearly erased from his own aircraft, and then I watched him rewrite policy in real time. That's not PR. That's leadership. Meredith was silent. Then, finally, Julian. "This is highly irregular, but the testimonies are now on record. I'll notify the board." Julian tapped his wrist. "Simone, please transcribe the last 4 minutes. Label it. Voices of Flight 3177. Forward to every board member unedited. Done." Julian faced the cabin. "You were asked to justify reform. You did." Then he turned back toward the intercom. "And Meredith, before the next vote, make sure the board asks the right question," which is Julian's voice was steady low and seismic. Not, "What did this cost?" but "What would it have cost if we stayed silent?" The line clicked. Silence. Then, applause. Soft at first, then louder, then stronger. Not for drama, for truth. Julian took his seat again, but not to rest. He had landed the call. Now it was time to lift the standard. The applause faded, but the impact hung heavy in the air. Seatbelts lay unbuckled, not in preparation for descent, but because no one wanted to sit still. Julian Hayes exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the cabin like a captain surveying new territory after surviving a storm. This aircraft he began has just made its most important landing without ever leaving the ground. Passengers leaned in. Every airline has a terminal. He continued, but very few ever find their origin the moment when they stop repeating the sky's path and choose a new one. He stood tapping the bulkhead beside him. From this moment, Flight 3177 is ground zero for every equity, ethics, and inclusion measure Crestwing Aviation adopts from this day forward. Simone chimed in through the ceiling legacy marker uploaded. This flight is now archived under Crestwing Reformation Index, Alpha 1. Tara Monroe whispered, "You've turned a malfunction into a mandate." Julian glanced at her, then around. "No, we did." Just then, from the rear of the cabin, a voice spoke up, quiet but firm. "If I may add something." Heads turned. A woman stood up from row 11D. She wore a neutral gray cardigan and simple jeans. Her presence had gone unnoticed until now. Julian narrowed his eyes. "Go ahead." She pulled out a laminated press badge and held it up. "My name is Lauren Pack, investigative journalist syndicated through National Horizon News." Gasps rustled across the rows. "Wait," what Devon whispered. "I didn't intend to reveal myself," Lauren continued. "This was just a routine profile on luxury business travel. I was documenting culture tone treatment, until everything changed." Julian approached slowly. "So you've been observing all of this?" Lauren nodded. "Recording. Notes. Photos. Interviews. I've got 10 hours of unfiltered truth, and I've already filed my initial story pitch." Julian's eyes stayed steady. And now Lauren looked around the cabin. "Now, I want to make this national, but only if you agree no edits, no press office spin. Just what happened, exactly as it unfolded." The cabin went still again. Julian didn't answer right away. Tara stepped forward. "What are you proposing?" Lauren held up her tablet. A 3-part special segment, the jet that didn't take off but changed everything. full crew accountability, institutional timeline, witness quotes, raw cabin footage, the real words, the real silence, and the moment it broke. Corey raised a hand. Even our testimonies, Lauren nodded. If you consent, yes, Devon muttered. This goes everywhere, doesn't it? Julian's voice returned low but unflinching. Let it. Lauren blinked. You're sure? Julian turned, slowly looking at the seats, the faces the ones who had spoken, and the ones still absorbing. I built this company to fly above storms, he said. Turns out some storms we have to walk through. He gestured toward Lauren's tablet. You want a story? Tell the whole one. Lauren lowered the device. I'll submit it by tonight, but be warned, this makes you a symbol. Julian responded simply. Symbols don't change systems. Stories do. A beat. Then Ruth Kinley added gently, and truth travels faster than any jet. Lauren gave a small nod and sat back down. Simone's voice returned overhead. Mr. Hayes, National Horizon's newsfeed algorithm has already registered keyword activity spike, Crestwing, Flight 3177, CEO on board. Estimated visibility, 1.6 million impressions by midnight. Corey let out a low whistle. Hope you like turbulence. Julian smirked. I prefer altitude. He stepped into the aisle again, this time not to declare, but to assign. Simone, begin packaging this flight's event log into our new employee onboarding program. Titled. Julian looked to Nia. She offered altitude as an access. Julian repeated it aloud. Altitude isn't access. Logged. Then to Tara. You'll help oversee the ethics integration. To Devon, you'll lead comms, internal and external. To Paul Kendrick. You'll be the voice that tells new recruits what almost went wrong and what didn't because someone finally said something. Paul's eyes misted. I won't let this fade. Julian nodded once. You won't have to, because now the world is watching. The weight of the moment wasn't in the air. It was in the eyes, the way people now looked at one another. Julian Hayes had given the orders. Lauren Pack had broken the story. The Crestwing flight that never took off had somehow traveled farther than any plane that morning. But something still hovered unspoken, until an unexpected voice cracked it wide open. It came from the back. Excuse me. Everyone turned. A man in his late 60s rose from seat 12C, his posture stiff but steady. Thin white hair, navy windbreaker, travel-worn briefcase at his feet. My name's Benjamin Rhodes, former compliance officer for Aerotex Airways. Retired now. I wasn't planning to say anything today. I've flown over 400 flights, sat in every class, seen every kind of passenger. He looked down, then back up. But 20 years ago, I was on a flight commercial when a young black man in a suit was removed from first class before takeoff. No warning. Just asked to leave. The flight attendant said there was a manifest error. He didn't argue. He left. The cabin was quiet. I watched it happen, Benjamin said. Didn't say a word. Not to the flight crew. Not to the company. Not to myself. His hands clenched the seat in front of him. I never even wrote it down. Julian took a step closer. What airline? He asked gently. Benjamin met his gaze. A charter that was eventually absorbed by Crestwing's current fleet. The name no longer exists, but the woman who made that call was Erica Vaughn. Gasps swept the aisle. Paul Kendrick looked like he'd been punched in the chest. Benjamin nodded slowly. I recognized her today. Same voice, same posture, same instinct. Back then, I told myself she was just doing her job, and that if I spoke up, I'd lose mine. Tara whispered. You buried it. Benjamin's eyes welled. I didn't bury it. I dragged it with me. For 20 years. The silence was heavy, not with judgment, but realization. Julian stepped forward. And today, Benjamin looked around the cabin. Today, I finally laid it down. He exhaled visibly lighter. Thank you for giving me that. Julian nodded once. Thank you for reclaiming it. Benjamin sank back into his seat, not with shame, but release. Then Simone's voice returned. New flag logged. Incident date cross-referenced. Internal archive match found 2005. Flight 882 passenger record redacted, but manifest confirms reassignment without cause. Julian looked up. So the man was real. Confirmed. No compensation. No complaint ever filed. Julian turned to the cabin. How many others were never logged? The question didn't need an answer, because now the silence had become witness, and witnesses were beginning to speak. A woman in 3F stood. I didn't intervene earlier when Paul hesitated. I wanted to, but I told myself, he's the officer. Let him speak. I regret that. A young man near the front added, I once saw a flight attendant ignore a black couple asking for help with an infant seat. I stayed quiet. It haunts me more now. Another voice, I watched a Latina executive be asked for ID 3 times while her white male assistant was waved through. And I just scrolled my phone. Julian walked slowly down the aisle, not speaking, just listening. The confessions weren't about guilt. They were grieving the silence. Until finally, Ruth Kinley stood once again and said the thing no one else had yet dared to say. This flight has become a truth tribunal, not by design, by need. She looked directly at Julian. And you, sir, didn't just call for accountability. You called for remembrance, for a reckoning that started long before this flight. Julian paused, then softly replied, because injustice has a tailwind. It builds speed with every silence. We slow it when we speak. Simone's voice came back through compiling real-time witness testimonies, uploading to When Silence Stands, portal access available for future employees, partners, and DEI trainers. Corey raised a hand. That sounds like a new kind of manual. Julian looked toward the cabin door. No, he said. It's a new kind of flight plan. The passengers remained standing, as if to say today no one lands alone. Outside, the sun hovered above the tarmac, casting the aircraft in gold. Inside it was still, not because the moment had passed, but because the passengers knew they were witnessing the final descent of an old way of flying. Julian Hayes remained at the front of the cabin. No notes, no mic, just presence. He looked over the rows of people who had arrived as strangers and were now somehow bound by something deeper than destination. He took a long breath. This started with a seat, he said, but it ends with a shift. A few nodded. Julian continued, I've spent my life building systems, and I've learned that the most dangerous failure in a system is silence. He glanced at Benjamin Rhodes, still seated near the back, at the woman who'd admitted ignoring bias, at the man who once filmed and now listened, because silence isn't neutral, it's complicity quietly worn. Julian turned toward the galley wall and tapped his smartwatch. Simone. Yes, Mr. Hayes, create new executive position. Title Chief Witness Officer. A stunned beat. Corey leaned forward. Chief what? Julian smiled slightly. Chief Witness Officer. Someone whose job isn't just compliance or audit or damage control, but remembrance. Someone responsible for keeping truth visible. He looked toward Tara Monroe. Too many stories vanish before they make it to paper. Too many voices are archived only in trauma. We need someone to stand at the intersection of policy and pain. Nia whispered, That's revolutionary. Julian turned to her. It's overdue. Then he slowly turned to Paul Kendrick. You stood silent, Paul, and you confessed. Paul stiffened. You hesitated then, you intervened. You enforced bias, then helped expose it. A long pause. And now I'm asking you, will you carry every story you almost ignored, and make sure none are missed again? Paul blinked. What are you saying? I'm saying I want you to be Crestwing's first chief witness officer. A murmur swept the cabin. Paul stared at him. Me? But I failed. Julian stepped forward. You felt. You owned. And you stood back up. That's what this role needs. Not perfection, but presence. Paul's voice cracked. But I don't have the training. Julian raised a hand. You've already started. Paul's eyes welled. I don't know if I deserve this. You don't, Julian said, then added gently. None of us deserve the seat we're given. We earn it by what we do when we're seated there. The cabin exhaled. Then slowly, Ruth Kinley stood. I second the appointment. Nia stood. I third. Tara nodded. Unanimous. Paul looked down, overwhelmed. Julian extended a hand. Paul took it. The cabin burst into quiet applause, not the kind for show, the kind for turning. Julian tapped his watch again. Simone. Effective immediately. Paul Kendrick is Chief Witness Officer. Assign executive clearance. Secure full access to flight records. His first directive: create a reporting system for undocumented incidents from the past 10 years. Confirmed. New title added to internal registry. CWO Kendrick authorized. Paul let out a trembling breath. Devon said softly, You just gave silence. A job description. Julian smiled. No, I gave it a reckoning. Then he turned back to the cabin. This aircraft won't fly today, but its message will. He walked toward the intercom and spoke clearly. This is Julian Hayes, CEO of Crestwing Ventures. As of now, Flight 3177 is the official origin point for the new Crestwing Civil Integrity Program. If you've witnessed injustice on the ground or in the sky, your silence is no longer required. Your story is. Simone's voice returned. Cabin changes logged. Policy edits complete. Employee training modules will be rebuilt around Flight 3177 protocol. Julian turned to the passengers once more. The next time you board a Crestwing aircraft, you won't be just a passenger. He looked directly at Nia, at Tara, at Paul. You'll be witnesses. You'll be leaders. He paused, eyes soft. And you'll never sit quietly again. The crew was gone. The chaos was quieted, and yet not a single wheel had left the ground. Flight 3177 had become more than a grounded jet. It had become a standard. Julian Hayes remained in the aisle as maintenance crews moved discreetly around the edges, prepping the aircraft for documentation. A legal rep waited on the tarmac. Media requests were already flooding in through Simone's network console. But inside the cabin, it still felt like something sacred had occurred. Passengers lingered. No one rushed to disembark. No one wanted to be the first to step out of a space that had somehow elevated them all. Tara Monroe turned to Julian. You know this won't stay quiet. Julian nodded. It's not supposed to. Nia leaned across the aisle. You think other airlines will follow? Julian smiled faintly. They won't have a choice. Paul Kendrick, now wearing a temporary Crestwing badge labeled CWO, stood silently near the door. He wasn't just a new officer. He was a living audit. Then it happened. A voice, soft, high-pitched, no more than 10 years old, floated from the rear. Mr. Hayes. Everyone turned. A small black girl stepped forward from row 14B. No one had noticed her before. She had sat with a woman, likely her mother, quiet the entire time. Julian knelt slightly to meet her at eye level. Yes. She clutched a pink backpack to her chest. My name is Kayla. Nice to meet you, Kayla. Her eyes were wide, sincere. I saw everything. Julian nodded. You were very brave to watch it all. I didn't talk, she said, but I thought a lot. That's okay. Sometimes listening is the bravest thing. She hesitated, then whispered, Can I tell you something? Julian leaned closer. She cupped her hand and whispered just 3 words into his ear. His eyes widened, then softened. He looked toward Simone's speaker and said, Simone create global campaign entry. Title, Tell the Sky I'm Coming. Logged. The passengers stirred. What did she say? Tara asked. Julian turned, voice steady. She said, Tell the sky I'm coming. Gasps. Then applause. Slow, reverent. A crescendo of realization. What began as humiliation ended in legacy. Julian addressed the passengers once more. This moment doesn't stay in this cabin. It boards every flight after this. Every crew. Every captain. Every policy. Every silence will be measured against what we witnessed here. He placed a hand on Kayla's shoulder. Because one child unseen, unheard, reminded us dignity doesn't need volume. It needs visibility. He turned toward the front, lifted the intercom. To all future passengers, Flight 3177 is no longer a route. It's a reminder that where you sit will never again define who you are. Simone's voice returned. Press conference scheduled. Internal training begins in 72 hours. Equity dashboard launched. Campaign Tell the Sky I'm Coming, trending globally. Estimated reach 12.8 million in 24 hours. Julian smiled. Good. He looked out the oval window. The tarmac shimmered with heat, but inside it felt like altitude. Devon tapped the headrest. You think it'll last? Julian turned. It already has. Because we didn't fix the aircraft. He paused. We fixed the altitude of expectation. As the door to the jet finally opened and the outside air drifted in, no one rushed to leave. Each person stepped off not as a passenger, but as a part of a new flight path, a new culture, a new declaration. And as the last heel touched the jet bridge, Kayla looked back over her shoulder and whispered once more, Tell the sky I'm coming. Julian nodded, his voice barely above a breath. It already knows. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Black CEO denied first-class seat. 30 minutes later, he fires the entire airline staff. YouTube https www.youtube.com. Watch. Via no go fi.